I never imagined that dawn would arrive decorated in fear and regret. The morning air in Portland was crisp, the faint scent of pine drifting through my open window. Yet instead of comfort, the fresh breeze carried echoes of the night's horror. My name is Hoa, and until yesterday, I believed I had learned to carry my past with grace between memory and moving forward. But when the call came at 2 a.m, everything fractured unbidden. The voice on the other end belonged to Detective Marshall, a calm but insistent tone that warned me of tragedy. My brother, Lynn, had been in an accident. A head-on collision on Interstate 5. He had been driving home after his shift at the diner. The details blurred into a terrifying haze: the other car, the skid marks, the frantic radio traffic. When they told me he was still alive but critical, my heart both stuttered and plunged. I rushed to the hospital, adrenaline fueling each step. The sterile corridors smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. When I finally saw Lynn, tubes and wires connected him to machines that echoed his shallow breaths. His face was pale, bruised, but the faint flicker of his eyelashes moving brought a surge of relief. I reached out and clasped his hand. It was cold, brittle, yet still held the warmth of life. Hours passed in a blur of monitors, doctors speaking in hushed tones, and the relentless ticking of the ceiling clock. I watched the sunrise from a curtained bed, its golden rays simultaneously promising hope and mocking my helplessness. Memories cascaded: our childhood in Seattle, laughter over stolen cookies, shared secrets under blanket forts. Those moments felt distant now, suspended in the sterile air. When the surgeon emerged, her expression gentle but weary, I braced for devastation. Instead, she spoke of cautious optimism. Lynn's injuries were severe: a fractured skull and a punctured lung, but his resilience matched the ocean's depth he had always loved. They planned surgery and a long recovery. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Relief mingled with guilt. Why him and not me? Why here and not there? I stayed by his side, scrolling through old photos on my phone, reading him messages and simple truths. I loved him, I was sorry for drifting away, I would never leave again. As the hours melted, I realized that tragedy did not just break the body, it cracked open the heart, revealing the hidden fissures of regret. And as I sat in that hospital chair, exhausted and raw, I vowed that my story, our story, would not be defined by silence or distance. It would be rewritten with forgiveness, presence, and unguarded love. As night fell, I remained vigilant, each beep from the monitors echoing my own heartbeat. I whispered to him stories of our childhood mischief, of dreams we once held. In that vigil, I understood the true cost of silence, unspoken apologies and fractured bonds. With voice, I promised to speak my truth, to be present, to never let fear silence my heart again. Days blurred together in the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the constant beeping of machines, the murmur of doctors and nurses, it all felt like a dream, one I couldn't wake up from. Lynn's condition remained critical. The doctors said it was touch and go. I held vigil beside his bed, my heart aching with every passing second. I remember the feeling of the cold metal chair beneath me, the slight discomfort of its rigid structure, but I didn't care. I couldn't leave. The hospital room, with its harsh fluorescent lights, felt like the only place that mattered now. Outside the windows, the world continued on. People walked by, living their lives, while mine was suspended in the grief and uncertainty of this moment. I had no idea how much longer this would last, how much more I could endure. For years, I had run from my past, avoiding painful conversations, avoiding the mess of my emotions. But now, sitting there, the weight of unspoken words pressed on my chest. Lynn was the one person who had always been there for me, and now, as he fought for his life, I was left with nothing but regret for the distance I had put between us. Growing up, we had been inseparable. He was the little brother who followed me everywhere, who laughed at my terrible jokes, who never let me forget to be kind, even when the world around us wasn't. But over time, I had drifted. I had moved away for college, then later for work, always prioritizing my independence, my career, my plans. Lynn had always understood, always supported me, even when I wasn't there. Yet, I hadn't been there when he needed me the most. And now, as I sat beside him in the sterile hospital room, I realized how much of our connection I had taken for granted. The phone calls that went unanswered, the visits that never happened, the words left unsaid. Every moment I hadn't been present, I now regretted deeply. The silence between us had grown over the years, and I had allowed it to fester. As I sat there, the guilt swallowed me whole. It consumed me in a way I couldn't explain. I had built a wall between us, brick by brick, each time I chose to stay silent, each time I ignored my own emotions. But now, in the face of his fragile life, I knew I could no longer hide from myself, or from him. I leaned closer to Lynn's bed, my hand gently resting on his. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the words I should have said long ago. "I should have been there for you. I should have called more, visited more. I'm sorry for everything I never said." Tears slipped down my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I felt a raw, vulnerable release. I wasn't sure if Lynn could hear me, but I needed him to know. I needed to apologize for the years I had wasted, for the love I had taken for granted. As the night stretched on, I stayed by his side, the silence between us now a quiet comfort. The machines beeped steadily, marking time in a way that felt both painful and soothing. I didn't know if Lynn would wake up, if he would be the same person he was before the accident. But in that moment, I realized something important: it wasn't too late to rebuild what had been broken. And as I whispered again, "I love you, Lynn," I knew this would be the beginning of something new. A promise to be present, to never let the silence grow between us again. The days turned into weeks, and I remained at Lynn's side, my world revolving around that hospital room. He was stable now, but the doctors were still cautious. His recovery would take time, physical therapy, rehabilitation, and most importantly, time for his mind to heal. But I was no longer just a passive observer in his life, I had become a part of his healing process. I was his voice when he couldn't speak, his strength when he felt weak, and his reminder that we were in this together. As Lynn's condition improved, I found myself struggling with something I hadn't expected: loneliness. It wasn't the physical absence of people, it was the emotional distance, the quiet that had taken root in my own heart. The silence between us had become so familiar, so suffocating, that now, with Lynn healing, I was left to confront it. When I had left Seattle all those years ago, it wasn't just a move for a job, it was a retreat. I ran away from everything that reminded me of the person I used to be, someone who had dreams, hopes, and a family who depended on her. I convinced myself that independence meant survival, that success was worth the sacrifices. But now, sitting in the sterile hospital room, I realized that my choices had come at a cost. I had abandoned the very people who had been there for me when the world seemed too harsh to navigate alone. It wasn't just Lynn. It was our parents, too. Over the years, I had allowed the distance between us to widen, until I couldn't remember the last time I had truly sat down and talked to them. My phone calls had become infrequent, my visits non-existent. And every time I told myself I would do better, something always seemed to come up. Now, facing the fragility of life and the uncertainty of Lynn's recovery, I felt the weight of my own neglect. I had taken my family for granted, assuming they would always be there, waiting for me to come back when I was ready. But I wasn't sure if they would ever trust me again. I wasn't sure if Lynn would ever forgive me for abandoning him during the years when he needed me the most. One evening, after a long day of sitting by Lynn's bedside, I walked outside for some air. The hospital courtyard was quiet, the soft hum of the city a distant murmur. I sat on a bench, feeling the cool night air brush against my skin, and let out a deep breath. The silence of the world around me mirrored the silence that had taken root in my life. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the city wash over me. I had spent so many years trying to outrun my past, trying to escape the guilt and regret that I felt for not being there for my family. But now, in the stillness of the night, I realized something: I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the mistakes I had made, the time I had wasted. But I could change the future. I could rebuild the relationships I had neglected. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But I had to start somewhere. I thought of Lynn, still lying in that hospital bed, fighting to get better. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to leave him again. I wasn't going to leave anyone again. The silence I had allowed to fester in my life would be broken, starting with me. And as I stood up from the bench and walked back inside, I made a vow to myself. I would no longer hide behind my fear, behind the walls I had built around my heart. It was time to face the truth, to face the people I had hurt, and to heal the wounds that I had caused. I wheeled my brother Lynn out of the hospital doors as the afternoon sun dipped behind the skyline. Each step of the wheelchair's wheels against the pavement felt like a promise and a question all at once. The world outside was unchanged: cars passing, pedestrians hurrying home, a bicycle messenger weaving between lanes, yet everything inside me had shifted. I realized that healing would not be a linear path. It would demand patience, compassion, and the courage to confront wounds I had buried long ago. As we arrived at our old family home in the suburbs of Portland, the familiar sight of the wooden porch and the rose bushes in front garden welcomed us. I paused, inhaling the scent of lavender and earth, memories flooding back. Earlier, I had hesitated to return. I feared the faces I had avoided, the questions I had left unanswered. But Lynn needed support, and so did I. Inside, the living room was just as I remembered: the faded floral armchair where I read fairy tales as a child, the photograph on the mantel showing our parents beaming at my graduation ceremony. Mom and Dad stood in the doorway, their expressions a mixture of relief and worry. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized how much I had missed them, and how much they had endured during my absence. We spent that evening around the dinner table. Dad served mashed potatoes with his famous gravy, and Mom brought out Lynn's favorite apple pie. Conversation started slowly. Dad asked about Lynn's recovery and expressed pride in my care for him. Mom clasped my hand, apologizing for not reaching out sooner. I had thought they would reproach me, but instead their love was a bridge welcoming me home. For the first time in years, we shared our stories, the challenges we faced, the fears we carried, the hopes we still nurtured. My parents spoke of nights spent praying for Lynn's safety, and I revealed the loneliness I felt after moving away. Lynn, his voice still soft but steady, thanked me for being there. The walls between us dissolved word by word, apology by apology. That night, as I tucked Lynn into bed in his childhood room, I realized that the wounds I had carried were not just his to mend. They belonged to all of us. Reconciliation required honesty, vulnerability, and above all, a willingness to listen. As the moonlight filtered through the curtains, I whispered a promise: no more silence, no more distance. We would face whatever came together, united by love renewed and bonds strengthened. By the next morning, dawn broke over misty lawns and dew petals. I rose before Lynn, crept to the kitchen, and set coffee grounds in the French press. The scent of brewing coffee filled the air as I welcomed a moment of calm. I thought of the journey ahead. Therapy sessions marked on the calendar, specialist visits, and adjustments to adapt to new rhythms. The responsibility was immense, but it was no longer mine alone. In my parents' trust and Lynn determination, I found strength to keep moving forward. The days following Lynn's return home were filled with small victories. Every step of his recovery felt like a milestone, every moment of laughter a sign that things might one day be normal again. We had our routines: early morning stretches, therapy exercises in the living room, and long conversations over dinner about everything and nothing. The bond between us, once fragile, was now being rebuilt, one word at a time. But as I watched Lynn push through the pain of his physical therapy, I realized that my own healing was not so simple. There was no set timeline for when I would stop feeling guilty for the years I had distanced myself from my family, no clear path to forgiveness from myself. I had always believed that time would heal all wounds, but now I understood that time alone was never enough. Healing required more than just waiting; it required action, sincerity, and a willingness to confront the past head-on. In the evenings, after Lynn had settled into his room, I would take walks around the neighborhood, trying to make sense of everything. The quiet streets and familiar houses were comforting, but they also reminded me of how much I had lost in my years of absence. I used to walk these streets with Lynn, hand in hand, our lives ahead of us with no idea of the pain that would come. Now, those streets seemed different. The people we had once known had moved on, the places we had frequented were no longer the same. And yet, there was something profound in returning to this place, a sense of coming home not just physically, but emotionally. I was no longer running from the past, I was confronting it, learning to live with the choices I had made, and finding a way to move forward. I started making calls, long overdue calls to old friends, distant relatives, and yes, even the colleagues and mentors I had neglected during my years of self-imposed isolation. The conversations were awkward at first, full of apologies and explanations, but slowly, the walls I had built around myself began to crack. Each conversation, no matter how uncomfortable, reminded me that it was never too late to reconnect, to rebuild the relationships that mattered. But the most important conversation I had was with Lynn. One evening, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I sat with him on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. His face, though still bruised, held a smile that reached his eyes. "You know, I always hated this place when we were kids," he said, chuckling softly. "It was too quiet. Too peaceful." I smiled, remembering our shared childhood complaints. "Yeah, I used to sneak out just to hear the city noise. But now, it feels different. Like everything has settled." "Maybe that's what we need," Lynn said, his voice thoughtful. "To settle. To find peace in the chaos." His words lingered in the air between us, a reminder that healing was not just about fixing the broken parts of us, it was about finding peace with what had happened, and with who we had become. As the days turned into weeks, I watched Lynn grow stronger, his laughter filling the house once again. And though my own journey was far from over, I knew I was no longer alone in it. We had both been shattered, in different ways, but together we were learning to piece ourselves back together. The road ahead would not always be easy. There would be moments of doubt, of pain, of setbacks. But I had learned something crucial during these weeks: the power of presence, the power of forgiveness, and the power of family. These were the things that would carry us through, no matter what came next. And as the seasons changed, so did we. The wounds of the past were still there, but they no longer defined us. We had learned to live with them, to grow through them. Together, we were stronger than we had ever been. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. With Lynn by my side, with the support of our parents, and with a heart that was slowly but surely healing, I was ready to move forward. The silence was no longer a barrier. The distance was no longer insurmountable. We had found our way back to each other, and that was all that mattered.